Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the
real
tricks.
reason
Dismissed.
why these
Imagine
actors
America
left MASH. Picture this. A hit TV show is riding the biggest wave of its career. Critics adore it, audiences can't get enough. And then one by one, the actors who made it famous start walking away. Not because the show failed. Because something behind the cameras just wasn't working anymore. That's exactly what happened on one of the most beloved series in television history. And the reasons behind those exits are stranger, sadder, and more human than most fans ever realized. Stick around, because by the end of this video you'll never watch this show the same way again. MASH didn't start out as a television phenomenon. It started as a novel written by a former army surgeon who had lived through the exact chaos he was writing about. That book became a movie. The movie became a cult classic, and 2 years later CBS turned the idea into a weekly series that nobody expected to survive its first season. The ratings were so weak in year one that the network almost pulled the plug. Instead, they moved it to a new night, gave it room to breathe, and within a couple of years it had become appointment television for millions of Americans. Part of what made it work was the risk it took. It mixed comedy with genuine tragedy in a way sitcoms simply didn't do at the time. It used actual sound design instead of a laugh track. It let its characters change, age, and sometimes break, instead of resetting them to the same jokes every week. That willingness to evolve is exactly what made the show great. It's also what pushed several of its biggest stars right out the door. Let's start with the departure that shook the entire country. For 3 seasons, one actor played the bumbling, big-hearted commanding officer of the unit, a character fans adored for his warmth even when he had no idea what he was doing. He won a Golden Globe for the role and briefly became one of the most recognizable faces on network television. But somewhere along the way, he started to feel like he was standing in the shadow of his own show. The series had increasingly become built around its lead surgeon, whose actor had begun writing and directing episodes and steering the emotional center of the story. The commanding officer, despite his popularity, had less and less to actually do. He wanted more, not out of vanity, but because he genuinely believed he had what it took to headline a series of his own. So at the end of season 3, he told the producers he wasn't coming back. What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in television history. Instead of writing him off with a transfer or a quiet retirement, the show's creators decided to do something no comedy had really dared to do before. They let the character go home. There was a party. There were hugs. There was a joyful, almost too perfect goodbye that lasted nearly the entire episode. And then, in the final minute, everything changed. A junior officer walked into the operating room with a piece of paper in his hand, and delivered the news that the beloved commander's plane had gone down over open water with no survivors. No music. No fanfare. Just silence and the sound of surgical equipment. It was one of the first times American television had killed off a fan favorite without warning, and audiences reacted exactly how you'd expect. Networks were flooded with letters, some praising the honesty of the moment, others furious that a character they loved had been taken away so suddenly. The show's writers stood by the choice, insisting they wanted to remind viewers that in a real war, not everybody makes it home. As for the actor himself, his post-show career didn't go the way he'd hoped. He signed a new deal, launched a variety special and then a string of sitcoms built around his own name and charm, and one after another they were cancelled, some after just a handful of episodes. Later in life, he openly admitted that leaving had been the biggest mistake of his career, saying he never again found a cast as talented or scripts as sharp as the ones he'd walked away from. When he passed away in the mid-1990s at the age of 68, tributes poured in from his former castmates, several of whom remembered him not for his later shows, but for the kindness he brought to every set he worked on. In a strange twist, the role he left behind, the one he felt was holding him back, ended up being the single most enduring performance of his entire career. If that departure was loud and public, the next one was almost the exact opposite. Quiet, unannounced, and full of behind-the-scenes tension that most viewers never saw coming. The actor who played the wisecracking surgeon and best friend to the show's lead had been part of the series from day one. Together, the two surgeons were the engine of the early seasons, trading jokes, breaking rules, and forming a friendship that audiences fell in love with instantly. But as the show matured and its leading man took on more creative control both in front of and behind the camera, the second surgeon found himself sliding from co-lead to sidekick. His character, once a driving force in the story, increasingly became the guy standing in the background nodding along. According to people close to the production, he'd signed on believing this would be a true ensemble show with equal weight given to both surgeons. When that didn't happen, he grew frustrated, and the frustration only deepened as contract negotiations stalled. He wanted better billing, a bigger share of the show's growing profits, and more say over where his character was headed. None of that materialized to his satisfaction. Here's the part that makes this exit so unusual. He had never actually signed a formal contract for the later seasons. It had all been an informal, handshake-style arrangement. So when he simply chose not to come back for season 4, the producers had no legal way to stop him and no real way to punish him for it either. He walked away clean, without a single lawsuit sticking. The show was left scrambling. There was no goodbye episode, no farewell party, no emotional send-off. The writers had to quickly explain his absence in the very first episode of the new season, saying his character had been discharged while the lead surgeon happened to be away. Fans were stunned. First one character was killed off, and now a second was simply gone without a trace. To fill the gap, producers brought in a new doctor, a calmer, more grounded personality that shifted the emotional tone of the show going forward. Looking back, most longtime viewers agree the series actually deepened after that shift, even if it lost some of its original buddy comedy spark. As for the actor who left, he didn't fade away. He kept a hand in acting here and there, but he found his real second act far from Hollywood, on Wall Street, eventually becoming a respected financial commentator who appeared regularly on business television discussing markets and investing. He earned a degree in history from an Ivy League school before ever setting foot on a soundstage, and it turned out that sharp analytical mind translated just as well to finance as it had to comedy. Despite the abrupt and unresolved nature of his exit, there didn't seem to be any real animosity between him and his former co-star. When he passed away in 2015 in his early 80s, his old friend from the show posted a heartfelt tribute online, calling him smart, funny, curious, and dedicated, and saying he wished they'd had more time to give each other a hard time, the way old friends do. Now let's talk about an exit that had nothing to do with money or billing, and everything to do with a person quietly struggling behind a role that audiences adored. This particular actor played the company clerk, a nervous, endearing young man with an almost supernatural ability to sense incoming helicopters before anyone else could hear them. He brought a gentleness to the character that gave the entire show its emotional center, a symbol of innocence surrounded by chaos. He was the only actor from the original film to reprise his role for television, and in doing so he turned what had been a slightly mischievous character on the big screen into something far more vulnerable and beloved on the small screen. But off-camera, things were much harder than they appeared. The grueling production schedule combined with his own perfectionism took a real toll, and he later spoke candidly about struggling with anxiety during those years, something that almost never made headlines in that era. He was also a young father at the time, and the long hours on set meant missing much of his daughter's early childhood, a regret he carried with him for years afterward.
He pushed for a lighter workload and eventually got some concessions from the producers, including reduced screen time, but it wasn't enough to keep him from ultimately deciding, partway through the show's run, that it was time to go home for good. Unlike the second departure we just covered, this one didn't happen quietly. The show gave the character one of its most emotional send-offs ever, a 2-part episode in which he returns from leave to find the unit struggling without him, tries to fix everything the way he always had, and slowly realizes that his life now belongs somewhere else, with his family and his community. The final image, him walking away alone with his signature teddy bear left behind, became one of the most quietly devastating moments in the show's history. After leaving, he stepped back from the spotlight almost entirely, trying his hand at a short-lived spin-off before eventually walking away from acting altogether to focus on painting, wildlife conservation, and even inventing, holding several patents along the way. He later explained simply that he left for his family and for his own burnout, and that he needed to put his life back together. These days he lives mostly out of the public eye, occasionally surfacing at a convention or in a rare interview, still remembered fondly as the heart of the whole ensemble. Not every departure came from emotional exhaustion or clashing egos. Some actors left simply because they felt they'd taken a character as far as it could go. The actor who played the pompous, rule-obsessed rival surgeon spent years perfecting a character audiences loved to hate, a man defined by his insecurities and his secret romance with the head nurse. But as the show grew more layered and its other characters gained depth and nuance, this one stayed frozen in place, a caricature in a show that had otherwise outgrown caricatures. By the end of season 5, the actor made the call not to renew his contract, later explaining that he felt he had pushed the role as far as it could realistically go. His exit wasn't dramatic, and there was no on-screen death or tearful farewell. The character was simply written off as having received a convenient promotion elsewhere. But his departure had a real creative impact. Without a one-note antagonist to lean on, the writers had to find comedy in more human, more complicated places, and many longtime fans consider that shift the moment the show truly matured. The actor went on to take smaller television and film roles for the rest of his career, but never again found a part as recognizable as the one he'd walked away from. His replacement turned out to be one of the show's most surprising success stories. The new character, a wealthy, classically educated surgeon from Boston, was introduced as a foil, arrogant and dismissive at first glance. But over the following seasons, the actor who played him slowly peeled back the character's defenses, revealing a man just as shaken by the horrors of war as anyone else, simply better at hiding it. Unlike almost every other major departure on this list, this actor stayed until the very last episode, closing out his run with a quietly stunning scene teaching classical music to a group of prisoners of war, widely considered one of the most moving moments in the show's entire history. He later turned down the opportunity to join a spin-off series, explaining that the character's story had already reached its natural conclusion and there was nothing left to say. After the show ended, he built an extensive career doing voice work for animated films, and more than a decade later, he spoke publicly for the first time about being gay, explaining that he had stayed private for much of his career out of a very real fear that coming out could have cost him roles, particularly in family-friendly work. He passed away in 2018 at age 75, remembered as much for his quiet courage off-screen as for his talent on it. Of course, no conversation about this show would be complete without talking about the women who helped hold it together, especially the head nurse whose character began as little more than a punchline built around an old nickname from the original film. The actress who played her had other plans. Season after season, she pushed to give the character more depth, more intelligence, and more agency, refusing to let her remain a one-dimensional joke. By the time the series ended 11 seasons later, the head nurse had become one of the most fully realized characters on the show, a decorated officer who openly questioned the morality of the war she was serving in, all while never missing a beat in the operating room. And here's the detail that makes her story stand apart from everyone else on this list. While cast member after cast member walked away, she never did. She was there for the very first episode, and there for the very last one of only a handful of actors who could say that. So why did so many talented people choose to leave one of the most successful shows ever made? The honest answer is that there wasn't one single reason. Some left chasing bigger opportunities that never quite panned out. Some left because their characters had stopped growing while everyone else's kept evolving. Some left because the emotional weight of the material became too heavy to carry alongside the demands of a real life and a real family. And at least one stayed through every single season, proving that sometimes the hardest thing an actor can do isn't walking away from a hit show, it's staying with it long enough to watch it change completely. Whatever the reason, each of these departures left a permanent mark on the story, reshaping who the show was about and what it was trying to say. Decades later, fans are still debating which era was better, the earlier scrappy ensemble or the more mature version that came later, and honestly, that ongoing argument might be the clearest sign of just how much this show mattered in the first place. Which of these exits surprised you the most? Let us know down in the comments, and if you enjoyed this look behind the scenes, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.